answers from round one. All right. The first one was the occupation of Ruby Payne-Scott, and she worked mostly as a radio astronomer. But that's just the TLDR version, you know. She was other things as well, not just a radio astronomer, but she was an atheist, promoter of women's rights at a time when women, especially in science, had it pretty tough. For example, so she was active, she started her career in the early 40s. She's from Australia, and she had to marry in secret because married women were not allowed to hold government positions in those days. So she is not just some hardcore nerd who sacrificed social life in the name of science. She actually did the science, but also had a life and had a family. But she had to balance all of these things, you know, under the radar of the government. So yeah, she made some sacrifices so that women of our generation will have it easier. So big thank you to her. And then also we move on to another historic figure who advocated for causes that we are aligned with way, way before their time. This is Thomas Paine. They happen to share a surname. Are they related? I don't know. Probably not. It's spelled differently. Paine with I and with Y. So, yeah, Thomas Paine doesn't get too much credit. I mean, he's not on any of the dollar notes. If we were Americans, we could have started a campaign that they put him on some dollar, but we're not. So, yeah, we leave it to the Americans to sort out their shit, but they have some heroes who are worshiping. Okay, so we are influencing them little by little. So why do we like Thomas Paine? Well, he was described as his fellow founding fathers as a filthy little atheist. So he advocated for separation of church and state, even more strict than the ones they ended up in the US. They did have nominal separation between church and state when they were founded. Arguably it's being eroded today, but that's a topic of another conversation. Also, he had very progressive views for his time in the area of social welfare. He was advocating for universal basic income. So whatever your economic persuasions, this was a pretty advanced view for its time, even if you don't believe it's something that our society should be implementing. And there was a conflicting opinion about his position on slavery. So historians are convinced that he was against slavery, but he wasn't very vocal about it. So here, neither here nor there. He didn't have the guts to promote anti-slavery point of view back then, because well, he knew that he's losing political points on that, and the slavery was a very established practice in those days. And also, historians seem to agree that he didn't expect in any potential future America that they were founding black people to actually be citizens. So maybe not slaves, but he didn't argue for total equality. But still, for this time, even on the topic of slavery, his views were progressive. So, yeah, interesting figure. And now we get to a question that nobody got right. So, everybody's going to be doing some serious learning right now. When you behold the power of the lahar, what's a lahar? It's not lava. This is, well, you could call it a mudslide, because technically it's just mud sliding down a slope, but it's super hot mud, and it exhibits also pyroclastic flow, which is something you get from volcanoes with superheated gases and ash and stuff. Unfortunately, I had to learn about pyroclastic flows around numerous debates about 9/11 and was it an inside job or not. But okay, out of all of this bullshit that was written online on that topic, at least came a little bit of knowledge about pyroclastic flows, and lahars are truly terrible natural phenomena. This thing can wipe out a whole village in a blink of an eye, and you don't want to encounter those things anywhere near you. This one in particular, I think, is taking place in Indonesia somewhere. So, okay, we all know the famous lava flows that have incinerated cities from Herculanus and Pompeii and down to modern-day volcanoes. But these cousins of lava flows are no less deadly, even though they're not as well recognized. So now you know lahars are pretty badass if you observe them from a safe distance. And this one is another one that we didn't get actually a solid answer. I was willing to get some points for somebody close enough. I think there was a half a point awarded to somebody who described something related to radio. Yes, it is related to radio. You could know the history, or you could have recognized the chart behind her. Well, I wouldn't be able to, but maybe somebody who knows a thing or two about electric engineering might be able. And that is a device for modulating the frequency of a transmission in order to prevent jamming of that transmission. It was a wartime invention. Her career in Hollywood was interrupted by the Second World War, and anybody who could help the war effort in some ways was recruited, and she helped by working on this device. Now, I'm a bit ambivalent towards using her as a poster child on achievement of women in that era. I guess our better hero would be the previous lady that we looked at, Ruby Payne-Scott. I mean, you don't have to be a Hollywood star to be respected as an engineer or as an inventor or as a scientist, but it's a kind of curious piece of trivia that she happened to do both. She had it easier than most women in the era. I mean, once you have the connection from Hollywood and all that, I guess you can be allowed to do whatever the fuck you want. But I'm happy that we live in a society where all women can strive for such achievements and not ones with connections and all that. And moving to a question where more teams actually managed to get it right, and this is the Panama Canal. So we had another canal in the news not long ago. We looked at the Suez Canal, where the Ever Given got stuck. That was a pretty epic event, and it was fun to watch. But if you recall the footage from the Suez Canal debacle, it was just like a canal, just a roll in the sand, like a straight line full of water where ships are going back and forth. And they still managed to close it with some stupid ship that got stuck. This thing here is orders of magnitude more complex. Not just because of the length, but because the Panama Canal needs to overcome also gradients. It uses two lakes on the way. And it's a marvel of engineering. And we are going to be in much more trouble if some ship gets stuck there and does damage to the infrastructure. I mean, if this thing breaks, it's going to be closed for years before they get their ship together and fix it. Now I'm going to admit that I used those questions in a previous event, but it wasn't here in Belgium, So not likely that anybody has been there and has reused any knowledge. But when we did that, there was one guy who was some maritime engineer who has actually been there. So he was super passionate and he got on the stage and explained a little bit about how the locks work and whatnot. I don't know any of that shit. I only know about it from Wikipedia. And there was a film about it as well. It was about Panama, not specifically the canal. So I'm not going to embarrass myself further about by saying something wrong about this jewel in transportation infrastructure. And a final answer reveal that is going to be the molniya orbit. Yeah. So yeah, I've talked about it to some people when we've talked about all things satellites and orbits. I had an optional course in celestial mechanics in university. I was doing computer science. It sounded weird, like it was like a joke. What the fuck is celestial mechanics? Stupid kid, I had to learn all of that from Wikipedia articles. So celestial mechanics is fascinating. And we get some quarter points on this question. For example, somebody said this is an elliptic orbit. Well, that's a good observation. One thing I have to be pedantic here. Every orbit is elliptic. And the circle is just an ellipse where the semi-major and semi-minor axes are the same. It's a bit like a rectangle and a square. A square is a type of rectangle. But what that team meant, it is a highly eccentric ellipse. And this is an important observation to have. It's easy to notice. You see how this orbiting satellite gets far from Earth, and then it gets much closer, which is not the orbit that our usual communication satellites use. So you have GPS satellites and Starlink and geostationary satellites. All of them are always on very circular orbits. They want to be the same distance from Earth all the time to do their thing. And this is an Earth observation satellite, because you can see the camera is always pointed at Earth. But why does it have to go back and forth so much? There was another team that mentioned a polar observation orbit. That's a quarter point there, because that's an important thing to notice. That this orbit actually allows the satellite to observe the far northern latitudes. But the point is not to observe the poles, but rather this is to provide telecommunications to very high latitudes. So geostationary orbits are always above the equator. They have an inclination of 0 degrees. So those orbits are only accessible from latitudes up to 60 degrees or something. So the higher you are in latitude, that's the angle at which you have to put your satellite dish. So here in Brussels we are at 51 degrees latitude. This means that your satellite dish needs to be pointing towards a point above the equator. So it has to be at 51 degrees. Actually at 39, because it's 90 minus the latitude to compensate for the curvature of Earth. And once you get above 60, then the satellites get too low above the horizon, and it's not practical anymore. And the Russians have a shit ton of territory above 60 degrees, and they wanted to provide telecommunications to Siberia and other areas that are out of reach for geostationary satellites. So they invented these orbits, and they use a very ingenious thing, ingenious parameter of highly eccentric orbits, and that is that satellites are super slow when they are far away, and they get fast when they approach the body they are orbiting. You have noticed this with comets. So comets, like the Hedy comet, spend 60 years way out in the Oort cloud, and then it comes whizzing by the sun in like a couple of weeks. And same thing happens with satellites that have eccentric orbits. they spend a lot of time far away. They get super slow when they're far. And they happen to be looking at more or less the same place. So you can have a satellite dish pointing at the same point in the sky, and you can have a constellation of 3 satellites in molniya orbits, and each of them is going to be spending 8 hours in roughly the same patch of sky right there. And that is the goal of the molniya orbit, to give people in Siberia satellite TV. And that was all from the answers from this round. Now let's look at the rankings.